Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Bambry, and I serve as the Vice President for Alumni and Student Engagement at your University of Illinois Alumni Association. I first want to thank everyone for joining us this evening, as we are looking forward to another great session of our ongoing Alumni College Speaker Series. Before I introduce our speaker this evening, I always like to remind everyone to please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation through the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We'll leave those questions at the end of the presentation and have left time to do so. I would also encourage everyone, if you haven't done so already, to visit Alumni Link, one of our newest initiatives at the Alumni Association. Alumni Link is an online networking and mentorship platform that allows alumni to connect and helps current students while also being able to interact with fellow alumni. Whether you have just a few minutes or many hours to spend with Alumni Link, I think you will find it to be a great platform and resource. You can find this by visiting alumnilink.illinois.edu. But let's get to why we are all here this evening, and that is to hear from a wonderful faculty member on a very interesting topic. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening. Lisa Elsie Mercer is an assistant professor of graphic design and Design for Responsible Innovation in the School of Art and Design at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research interests are in developing and executing design interventions that fuel and sustain responsible design for social impact. The developed frameworks and tools are meant to create a space for conversation and knowledge exchange where participants can actively collaborate in the creation of new ideas and solutions. This methodology is evident in her major projects titled Racism Untaught and Operation Compass. Racism Untaught, which he co-coordinates, is a framework focused on revealing and unlearning forms of racialized design or design that perpetuates elements of racism through a design framework. Industry partners include Target, Spotify, PayPal, and Apple, while academic partners include the University of Illinois, University of Minnesota, Columbia College Chicago, Parsons School of Design, Louisiana State University, and Auburn University. Operation Compass is an ethnographic research study concerned with developing design-led interventions to combat the complex social issue of human trafficking. Mercer has been published and invited as a keynote speaker internationally, and has also been featured on several media outlets, including the Dallas affiliate for NBC and the NPR shows Texas Standard, Illinois Newsrooms, All Things Considered, and Sirius Radio. She received her BFA in Visual Communication and Design from Purdue University and her MFA in Design Research from the University of North Texas. And some very exciting news, just today, Lisa was awarded with the Faculty Award for Excellence in Research. So let us be some of the first people to congratulate her on that wonderful accomplishment. On that note, and without further ado, please welcome Lisa Mercer.
Thank you, David. All right. Well, first off, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about my work and share my research with the alumni community today. I've been looking forward to it. I'd like to start us off by reading a land acknowledgement. As a land grant institution, the University of Illinois has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. I would also like to begin today by recognizing and acknowledging that I'm on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Waya, Miami, Mascoutin, Ottawa, Sauk, Muskogee, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. I'd like to share this link with you. This is a website called Native Land, and you're able to visit to see the lands that you are all currently on. This does not cover every territory, but it does provide a good amount. So you should be able to search your address or a city, and it will show you the local nations that had historical claims to the land we are each currently on. And so I invite you to do it. It's a really great resource. As David mentioned, I received my undergraduate degree from Purdue University. And being an undergraduate student in the 90s, I had an amazing advisor who's told me that I should take an HTML class because the internet was booming. And so I did, and I was really glad that I did, and I loved it. And so I took as many coding courses as I possibly could before I graduated. I worked in industry for 15 years. My first job was as a junior web designer in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I ran my own agency and worked as an art director in Denver, Colorado. And my last job in industry was as a design researcher in Dallas, Texas. I went back to work on my MFA in design research at the University of North Texas in 2013. And the focus of their program was focused on design research process and pedagogy. And I knew I was really interested in coming back into academia and working as a professor. So I knew this was a really good fit for me. I started in January of 2013 and I completed in December of 2015. And one of the things that I learned from my advisors there was that designers can affect change on complex social issues. And I really believed in this. I wanted to move into things that I was really interested in designing for. And I didn't want to do it on my own. I knew I needed to work with people in the community and individuals who had a passion for what I was focused on. They also imparted on me the design research process, which I was actively already incorporating into much of my work. So I included this visual from the Interaction Design Foundation, and I purposely included it from them because of my background in web design and mobile app development while I was working in industry. If you're not familiar with the design research process, it typically starts with empathy. And we're asked as designers to empathize with the user that we're designing for, and then to further contextualize that empathy using primary or secondary research. So either research that we're reading that other people have conducted or research that we've conducted ourselves. And then we take all of the things that we learn from those two areas and then start ideating, creating ideas about solutions and how we can reimagine gaps or problems that we've identified. And then we start to prototype those ideas and test them. And it's a very iterative process. That's why you see these dotted lines everywhere. So my first major research project was called Operation Compass. And it's an ethnographic research study concerned with developing design-led interventions to combat the complex social issue of human trafficking. And why, I always get the question, why did you choose human trafficking to focus on? And it was really because I saw a flyer on a wall very similar to this one at UNT. And it surprised me that there was a student group focused on human trafficking. And I thought, I wonder what they'd be doing, like I didn't understand exactly what the student group was doing. And I was really naive to human trafficking around me at the school at the University of North Texas, and even around the places that my children were. So my first idea, being a web designer and a mobile app developer, I thought, how can I use technology that would really allow me to create something that would support victims of human trafficking? And my advisors, Michael Gibson, Keith Owens, were really smart. And they said, before you go and create that, that app or that idea you have, you really need to do some research so that you can understand the intricacies of human trafficking. And so I did just that. I really cold called any nonprofit that would talk to me, any victims advocate, a lawyer, anyone who was working in the field of human trafficking that would give me any amount of time. And if they referred me to somebody, I would absolutely call that person and talk to them as long as they would be willing to talk to me. And what I really learned from them was that many victims of human trafficking didn't identify as a victim of human trafficking. So then anything I developed for victims of human trafficking, if they didn't identify as a victim themselves, then why would they use it? And so I learned that I was really focusing in the wrong areas. So I took guidance from Polaris, one of the leading nonprofits in the United States in the fight against human trafficking. And the physical locations that they identified that were common for human trafficking was hotels, delivery drivers had an opportunity, strip clubs, and truck drivers. And so in 2013, Polaris received over 130,000 phone calls on their hotline for human trafficking, and only 185 self-identified as truck drivers. 79 of those were unique cases, and 70% of those unique cases referred to a minor being involved in some capacity. So I was curious, if truck stops was one of the primary locations, then why was it such a low identifying rate on the hotline? So that's really what prompted the major question in my research. How can a modified form of technology enable truck drivers to report suspected cases of human trafficking at a higher rate? And I knew nothing about truck drivers. I didn't even know a truck driver. And so the first thing I knew I needed to do was go to truck driver training school. And so that was what I did. There was one in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And these two gentlemen that you see here have over 50 years of experience in the truck driving. And they talked to me about everything. You know, what do you do every day? What type of technology do you use? How do you use it? Why do you use it? And they let me get in the orange rig that you see on the left so I could see the types of technology they were teaching at the truck driver training school. They also told me which truck stops to go to and which ones to avoid. And so this is a truck stop right outside the Dallas-Fort Worth area. It parks up to 200 truck drivers, maybe slightly over 200. And all of the amenities that you see on the right are really why truck drivers stop at this location. And these are pictures. So my husband and I spend many Friday nights having pie with truck drivers at this location. And I really wanted it to be informal. I wanted to go and I wanted to learn from truck drivers. And I wasn't really focused on the human trafficking that was happening at the truck stop, or even if it was, I was really focused on the types of technology they used. So that way I could understand if I was going to integrate a form of technology that allowed them to report suspected cases, which one made the most sense. And so that was really my focus in talking to them, is just learning about what they did and how they lived their lives. Some of the things that I learned from them while in conversation was the names for sex workers and victims of human trafficking at the truck stops. One of the most common ones that I would hear is lot lizards. And they even sold clothing and stickers that said lot lizards on it. And so it became a part of the culture. And I realized, and I started to learn from trucker drivers that there was hesitation in reporting it because they didn't understand the difference between prostitution and forced sex work. I also learned about the different types of technology they used. One of the most common ones that is associated with truck driving in the United States is the Citizens Band Radio, better known as the CB, a Qualcomm global positioning system, a cell phone, mobile app, tablets, computers, mobile hotspots, and satellite radio. And so they used quite a few, and they used them all for different reasons. So I would get truck drivers who would send me pictures of their rigs. They would send me details of how they used all the equipment that was in their rig. And so the little wire that you can see hanging down is the CB. And I knew that I wouldn't be able to incorporate anything into the CB to report suspected cases of human trafficking. So that was immediately off the list as something I could utilize. I also learned that truck drivers didn't really use the CB like they used to because they were hearing so much solicitation for drugs and sex on it that they would often turn it off and only turn it on in inclement weather, or if there was a slowing of traffic and they wanted to understand if there was an accident ahead of them. The next two types of technology I'll talk about is the Qualcomm and the GPS. The Qualcomm is an onboarding computer that many drivers would turn off because they felt like Big Brother was watching them. And so they would turn it off while they were driving. And when they turned it on, they would manually put in their hours of what they were doing. And I knew that if I put in a form of reporting through this, that it would not remain anonymous for them. It wouldn't guarantee any anonymity. And so this immediately went off the list as a possibility. The Garmin, as you may know, doesn't have a real input besides, where you're going from point A to point B. And so while this is a great piece of technology for them for wayfinding, it was not a great tool for me in allowing them to report suspected cases. I met many drivers who absolutely loved apps. There are 3 professional driving programs that most of the truck drivers I talked with used. It was with Pilot, Loves, and Petro. And they're really great professional driving programs. And it allows them to rank up points that they can use to either purchase amenities, maybe wash their clothes, get a movie or watch a movie, even potentially buy stuff within their shop. And one of the most important things was reserving a place to park at night in a safe space. Now, I could have used these apps to potentially report suspected cases. However, it still wouldn't allow them to remain anonymous, given that they had professional driving programs associated with their names. And I also learned that they didn't always know when to get involved. You know, they had talked about potentially, you know, calling, and then as soon as the police showed up, the victim of human trafficking would turn on them because the trafficker would come up. And so they in turn became the ones that were often in trouble. I've heard many stories that truck drivers didn't know, you know, how to exactly identify, like I've said. So there was this gap of education of what human trafficking was and how to report it. And many of them, if not all of them, had stories about one night that they remembered. There was just a girl that was too young that shouldn't have been there, and they didn't do anything. And so they wanted to actively be involved in the solution. They really wanted to be a part of whatever it was that I created. They wanted to use it, and they wanted to know when it existed. And the other thing I learned was they have a bird's eye perspective. You know, they're much higher in their position when they're driving on the highway. So not only were they witnessing things at truck stops, but they were witnessing a lot just driving down the highway. And so many of the stories I collected were based off of just things that they had viewed from being at a high perspective. So this is the first app that I created, and I took this app to a human trafficking conference where I wanted to make sure that victims advocates, lawyers, people who work directly with victims of human trafficking could actually use the information that was being collected. And so in it, I made sure that truck drivers would be able to remain anonymous, that it would be convenient for them, that it included their safety. I learned the different types of technology they used, and that the app needed to be really easy, just super basic. And the things that I learned at the Human Trafficking Conference was they wanted it to be in Spanish, and they urged me to create a policy statement. The final app did not include a photo because one of the things that there was concern about was pornography laws. And I couldn't guarantee to a user who had witnessed something and potentially taken a picture that it wouldn't be saved to their phone. And so for that reason, we had to remove the photo. So this is the app as it stood when it was put out in January of 2016. I partnered with Mosaic Family Services, which is a nonprofit in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and they agreed to receive all of the suspected cases that the app brought in. And we decided this in collaboration with the Dallas PD. All three of us in a room decided that this was the best way so that people were comfortable reporting suspected cases. And it isn't every way, or it isn't this way in every city, but the Dallas PD and the North Texas Coalition, which I'm still a part of today, have a wonderful agreement in working together and finding the best solution for victims of sex trafficking. And so that was the best solution. I like to point out in the longer slide that you see, the fourth one in, that there's make a recording. And this function is specifically there because of the solicitations that drivers were hearing on the CB. I wanted to give them an opportunity to record what they were hearing and then submit it if they didn't know how to respond to what they were hearing. The victims advocates were excited about this functionality because they knew that victims of human trafficking could potentially use it as well and submit it for a form of help. With this partnership, we started realizing that it wasn't just truck drivers that were seeing things that they didn't know how to respond to. This was also restaurant inspectors, plumbers, electricians, alarm installers, pizza delivery people. So it became an event or events where we would create an opportunity for these specific trades to come, and we would educate them about what human trafficking looked like and then how to report it. And with each tradespeople that we worked with, I created posters. And this is intentionally supposed to look like a beautiful, idyllic day with a bit of a punch in the gut with a quote, because that really is what trafficking is. You don't always know that you're next to a victim of human trafficking. And so many of the posters look like a very sunny, idyllic day with a quote that really was from a tradesperson that we interviewed. So one of the things that I learned from this work was that long-term interdisciplinary partnerships have the potential to provide a continuation of scalable design interventions. And what I mean by that is I was asked to be a part of the North Texas Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and I still work on their data committee. And without this work having put me in the position where I'm sitting at the table with these people, there wouldn't have been the opportunity to do more with and around the complex social issue of human trafficking. And so I started to think, how could I incorporate these ideas into my classrooms? So my first semester at the University of Illinois, I created a class with another professor called Get Real. And this class was focused on the development of headsets for immersive reality situations and for creating an immersive reality experience. And we created them specifically with the Educational Justice Program that was developed by Dr. Rebecca Ginsburg at the University of Illinois. And she works specifically with people who are incarcerated working towards reentry. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, we're going to create this immersive reality class, and I think it'd be great if we focused on creating experiences for people who are working towards reentry. And she thought the same thing, and so we started working together. And so when the students created the headsets, it was really specifically for thinking about like taking them into the detention center and then the comfort of somebody being in the detention center and having something on their head. So making sure that they could quickly get it off if they felt uncomfortable. And so this is one example of this is an example of one of the headsets that was created, and you might hear the music. I hope it's not too loud. And then the next step was creating the immersive reality experience itself. And we took cues directly from the alumni from Dr. Ginsburg's initiative. And some of the things that we were asked to focus on was how to order a coffee at Starbucks, how to order food with a phone, how to cross the street, and how to pump gas. And so these were specific experiences that alumni from the program felt like they would have liked to have known before they re-entered into society. And so all of the situations that students created was focused on the idea of a phone prompting the immersive reality experience. And then once you put it in the immersive reality headset, you would be going through this, and they would be able to use controllers to then learn how to do the different things that we were walking them through. The next class that I focused on developing was called scrollytelling. And if you don't know what scrollytelling is, it is the act of scrolling through a website, just like we do maybe on social media. But this time it's really specifically to tell a story. And so one of the biggest asks I got from students was, how do I create motion in my design? And while that wasn't my expertise, web design and mobile app development was. And so I thought, how can I incorporate teaching them the act of storytelling and interactive design and motion? And so that's exactly what we did by using Webflow and stories created by Vashti Harrison. She has 3 books. One of them is called Little Leaders, Bold Women in Black History, Little Dreamers, Visionary Women Around the World, Little Legends, Exceptional Men in Black History. And each of the students selected one person from those books, and they had to create a scrollytelling experience. And so what you're witnessing here is the act of just scrolling down the website and information showing up. So this is Marsha P. Johnson and an interactive storytelling about her in her life. And then this story is about Wang Zhenyi and her life. And so the students this is an 8-week course. And so I wanted the students to understand that as designers, we have an opportunity to develop tools that prompt thought, conversation, and dialogue. Even when it's in the act of telling a story, there's a conversation that can be had around the telling of that story. So because I was developing these courses, I had many educators asking me, like, how are you doing this? How are you getting away with it? Besides having amazing faculty support, I was really interested in helping other educators have these same conversations. And so the co-developer of Racism Untaught, Teresa Moses from the University of Minnesota, was doing the exact same thing at her institution. And being a good friend, we would often have conversations about how we were incorporating these thoughts and ideas into our classroom, and how other educators were interested in doing the same. And so then how could we support them in their interests? And so we decided to develop a toolkit called Racism Untaught that really allowed educators to guide difficult conversations on race and racism. So one of the first important steps to understanding oppression is to understanding how our own social identities intersect with those systems of oppression. So often the first thing we do in a workshop or in a classroom where we're running the toolkit is we talk about our own social identities. And so one of my social identities is that I'm biracial. And so my race is mixed race and my ethnicity is Mexican. And so these are some of the things that people often ask me. And one of my favorites in this list is when I filled out a form and they called me after I had left wherever I was, I won't say where I was, and they called me back and they said, we're calling because you picked white and Hispanic, you can't pick both. And I always thought that was so poignant, you know, like it literally meant that I had to be in a box. And so I like to include that one. So racialized design is design that perpetuates elements of racism. And we break that into 3 different identifiers: artifacts, systems, and experiences. The first example I have is the artifact is for the former mascot of the University of Illinois, Chief Alumni Weck, who was officially retired in 2007. Another example of an artifact is an ad put into the public domain by Nevaeh in 2011. This ad features a nicely dressed Black model about to throw a decapitated head of his own head with an afro and a beard. And the text on the ad reads, "Re-civilize yourself," implying that Black men who wear their hair naturally or Black people who wear their hair naturally are uncivilized. This picture is of an image of Robert Moses, or of a bridge that Robert Moses created. Robert Moses was a prominent urban architecture from the 1920s and 1970s in New York City. And he developed a highway system with the bridges at 9 feet tall. And he did this intentionally because it wouldn't allow the 12-foot public buses to get to certain areas of the city. He purposely excluded Black and brown communities, stating white people of upper and comfortable middle class would be free to use this parkways. And he implemented this into policy, and then other cities in the United States adopted this same form of urban transportation. And these bridges and these oppressive systems still exist today. So if you are living in New York City or lived around, Robert Moses is someone that I am sure you have heard of. And the example of experiences, maybe being asked the question, what are you? Where are you from? No, where are you really from? And so these are the types of prompts that we provide workshop participants or students in our classes. So this is what the board looks like. The board is 5 feet wide and 3 feet tall. And as you can see, it's the design research process. And it's a little different than the one I showed you earlier. The first step is not empathy, it's context, because we truly believe that if we wait for everybody to empathize with racism, then we'll be waiting forever. And so providing context is really important to artifact systems or experiences of racism. And the last step is no longer test, it's impact, because we need to understand that good intentions are no longer good enough, and that we really need to start understanding the impact that we're having with those intentions. And so each step here has cards that correspond. So this is the digital board that we use in all of our workshops. As of last March, of course, we've been doing all of our workshops online. And so this is the this is the board that we use through Mural. So last fall, this was a prompt that I provided one of the student groups. It's of a Marc Jacobs runway show where he put dreads on all of his white models. And as a response to the anger that came out of what he did, his apology was, "All who cry cultural appropriation or whatever nonsense about any race or skin color wearing their hair in a particular style or manner. Funny how you don't criticize women of color for straightening their hair. I don't see color or race, I see people." Now, I included the apology, or what I like to call the non-apology, because there's so much of what he said in that apology that perpetuated the hate or the oppression and racism that existed within this fashion show. And so this is what the board looked like at the end of this semester. And I'd like to show you how the students walk through within a 16-week course using the toolkit. So the first step, like I mentioned before, is called context. And so we have over 60 elements of racism associated with this step that students use to look at the prompt. And with the Mark Jacobs example, the students in that group decided that colorblindness, cultural erasure, cultural appropriation, cultural taxation, entitlement, blackfishing, racial gaslighting, and whitewashing. And so they determine which cards, which elements of racism apply to the prompt that they've been given and which ones don't and why not. So I want them to understand the whys and why nots of what the elements of racism that are applied to that prompt. Because when we try to talk about racism as a whole, it can be a little too elusive and the conversation can remain unguided. And so these elements of racism really allow the students to narrow in and zone in on the different elements of racism that truly exist. The next step within context is levels of oppression. And so the smaller circle is called beliefs. So it's closer to the core of who we are, our personal beliefs. And then you work yourself out into the cultural, and that is what is reflected in our community as a whole. So an individual's personal belief would then prompt an agentic action. And so then that belief is put into action. And then institutionally, what is the reaction that we have from that action? Are we dismissing it? Are we disapproving it? Or is it unapproving it? Or are we sort of unaware of it? And depending on that reaction, it depends on how it's perceived culturally. And so then it doesn't become a cultural norm. Maybe let's say cultural appropriation. It becomes a norm, and then it reinforces these personal beliefs that it's okay to appropriate someone's culture. And so the students are asked to create sticky notes that help them understand the levels of oppression that exist in the prompt that they're given. So again, the Mark Jacobs example, one of his beliefs is that culture is for consumption and has no greater historical importance. And so the agentic action is that he dismisses the people calling him out because he benefits from pretending there's an issue. Institutionally, white models were praised for using their hairstyles while Black people still experience prejudice for them. And then culturally, Black culture is seen as a consumable good rather than a people's history. The next step is define, and this is where we ask students to use qualitative and quantitative research methods to further understand the prompt that they've been given. And so the students in this group use an eras map, a graffiti wall, a journey map, image sorting, an annotated bibliography, literature review, research plan, and popular media search. So every student in this class, I require that they create an annotated bibliography and a lit review and a research plan. And I often require popular media search because I want them to understand how their prompt is being talked about in popular media. And I encourage them to look at it from all perspectives. So I encourage them to consider their own ideas of how they consider this prompt, and then purposely looking at the opposite view. So that way we can each create our own critical perspective. Then we ask them to create a thesis question using this guiding question as an example. How might design be used to create some sort of action in order to create change with specific community holders or stakeholders? So their main question is the biggest one, and I left all the sticky notes and everything so you could sort of see their thought process in the development of the question. How might we educate aspiring trendsetters on the dangers of appropriation in the pursuit of profit? And so everything that they ideate from here on out is focused on that idea. So on these, I blacked out, you'll see those little black bars, I blacked out the students' names. But the student on the right wanted to tell a story with comic books or graphic novels and illustrations. So I'm going to follow this through into the prototyping step. We also asked them to consider, are the ideas really working towards good impact? You know, we have ideas that might have great intentions, but we don't want to just stay there anymore. We really want to make sure that those intentions are also leading towards impact. And are we working away from the oppressive thought to an anti-oppressive action? So if we were specifically focusing on racism, then are we working towards an anti-racist action? And so the students each plot their own ideas, and then they guide discussions and say, oh, you know, I really think your idea has great intentions, but it's not yet quite to impact. So maybe you need to add something to get to impact. Maybe it's a system of ideas they need to, or maybe they need to incorporate some ideas, but it's a great opportunity for students to then ideate with each other and think about how to work towards having a good impact. And then they work through the low, mid, and high fidelity prototype. So this student is the one that created the comic book. This was his low fidelity prototype, the mid fidelity, and then the high fidelity prototype. And the last thing they're asked to focus on is the impact. How could they begin to measure the impact that they're having with the idea that they developed? And so they pick cards that say, you know, maybe there could be a pledge, or there could be some sort of brief that allows people to understand the difference between appreciating a culture and culture appropriation. Maybe there's a vision statement of how comics could think about storytelling, or how the historical ways that this has been done, and maybe it's appropriated culture. And so again, this is what that board looks like at the end of the 16 weeks. And these are some of the results of the work that have resulted from the class. So this is a game that a student was prompted with the Robert Moses Bridge. If you recall, it was one of my examples. And the original intention of this game was to really just show people how difficult it is to move in New York City because the buses aren't allowed on that highway. And each of the cards there divvy out different powers and privileges. And so ultimately it became a game about power and privilege, and how that really affects how we move about in the world. This is a closer picture. This is an I Belong. The student was prompted with the question, do you speak your native language? It was an experience that we had illustrated. And this was as a result. She created a website that was a collection of stories of people who had been asked that question or similar questions. This is a graffiti wall of a student who was prompted with the question, do you speak your native language? And it was put up in the walls of the art building and in other areas, I think the student union as well. And the student asked, have you ever been stereotyped based on your perceived race? What was your response to that stereotype? And how would you rather be greeted? And they ultimately created a campaign called, where are you really from? Do you really need to know? Just say hi. And it became this idea of, do you need to know where somebody's from? Do you need to know their sexuality, their gender identity to have a conversation with them? And if you don't, which you usually don't, then you just say hi. And this was an exhibit that the students, graduate students put together that was focused on understanding the Native American community on our campus and their perspective on Chief Illini Weck, and then the experience that people had through the exhibit and what they learned from it. We are currently working with Matterport, Apple, PayPal, and Spotify on workshops, and we're continuing to work with Target. I put Target in red because we're doing something a little different with them, where we've actually trained them on the toolkit. And so they're actively training 600 employees right now. And in the fall, we'll begin, Terry and I, Teresa, and I will be training an additional 1,000 employees for Target. And so we're really excited about this partnership and the way that they are really engaging with the toolkit. The graduate program in the graphic design program has currently changed to, or recently changed to Design for Responsible Innovation. And we did this really because the faculty have a really invested interest in teaching students how to be agents of change within their communities. And so we wanted to do this. We not only wanted to be innovative, but we wanted to do it responsibly. And we wanted to make sure that other people knew that if you come into the program, that there is going to be an invested interest in the ethics behind how we design. And today, I don't usually brag, but I was so excited. I won the Faculty Award for Excellence in Research. And just given the topics that I talk about, it was a wonderful award to receive. And so I just wanted to share that with everyone today. And thank you for the time. I think I'm almost exactly at 40 minutes.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Can you hear me again? Sorry, I'm just coming off mute and always get a little worried. So fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Really wide-ranging topics here, but also so important. I know we're going to jump Q&A here in a second. I would encourage folks that have joined us to feel free to drop questions into the Q&A. As I mentioned in the chat, we'll certainly work to get to as many of those as possible before our time is out here. I know you touched on this briefly, but we did have a question about would this be available for graduates online? I think you've kind of answered that already, but certainly wanted to just bring that forward in case there's anything else you wanted to mention about that for those on the line.
Oh, absolutely. So for graduate students at the University of Illinois, they are more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to them. At different institutions, like you mentioned at the beginning, we are working with different institutions on making sure they have access to the toolkit. And if there's somebody who's interested, please email us. We are absolutely interested in talking to you.
Fantastic. And yeah, we got a question as to if the slides will be available. I think that the whole recording will be available, and you'll be able to stop and start that as you'd like here. It'll be available on our website at UIAA.org or on a Illini link. Or I know that Lisa mentioned the College of Fine and Applied Arts is going to get the recording as well, so we'll ship that over there as well. I would just sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to say, I always have so many slides, but I'm such a visual person that I really rely on the visuals to help me tell my story. So I know it's something I need to actually narrow down. I think this one had over 100 slides. So.
No, absolutely. And no, it's been great. I was wondering a little more about the kind of corporate or company relationships and how you see those continuing to evolve. And also just with, how society is we'll say changing, how do you see companies kind of bringing this into what they're doing even more into the future?
Oh, yeah. So I don't know if I said this in the thing, but we developed the toolkit in the spring of 2018. And in the past year, we've gotten, twice as busy as we were before. And the difference that I'm noticing, and I wouldn't want to speak for Terry, but I would think she might say something similar, is that the engagement that people have in the conversation and the acknowledgement of social identities has become a part of the conversation in terms of power and privilege and the understanding of that. And I've seen a shift. I don't think it's exactly changed yet, but I have seen a shift. And so I think because of that, we've been able to engage in the conversations in a real way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Cedric in the chat here, he said he understands how students will use this, but how do the corporations or companies, how will they apply that toolkit to their environments?
Yeah. So the corporations that we're working with right now, it's either been a workshop directly with the company. So we offer 2-hour, 5-hour, and 8-hour workshops. And typically at the end of the 8-hour workshop, we're asked to do more workshops because they had so much fun in doing the workshop. And then we have Target, who's doing Train the Trainer. And it's really exciting to work with them because they're engaging with it in a way that's different than the other workshops that we have. And they're really trying to incorporate an anti-racist lens into their design process. And so it depends who I'm talking about when I talk about our industry partners. But I think there is an interest for designers to look at the process we use and realize that maybe we're not asking the right questions at every step. And so one of the things that this framework does is it really prompts you to do that. It really requires you stop and consider the impact that you're having.
Absolutely, and that's so important. So we had another question come in here as well. Mary says, by going through the design thinking, I understand it's storytelling the solution. What advice would you share to help young designers influence older generations on social issues? And then the question continues, do you see that social change is difficult because of generational differences in cultural norms?
Well, I think it would be too easy for me to say yes to that because of obvious reasons. You know, the generational issues or generational differences are just, they're usually kind of, you know, obvious when we're talking about vastly different generations. But I also want to say it's not that easy, right? It's more nuanced than that. It's not so binary. And I think it's the reasoning about the way that we think about social identities within those generations that really it could apply to more than just racism. It could be the way that we think about gender or sexuality. And so we've seen some of those pushes against sexuality and the pushes that we see against gender conformity. And so I don't know that it's as easy to say, yes, that I see these differences in terms of generational gaps. But one way of doing it is to even just have discussions on books or documentaries. I know I am a part of a book club as well that I love to go and listen to how everyone thinks about this issue, because to me, it isn't about creating or requiring that everybody think the way I do. I really want people to understand their own social identities from their own experiences and understand how we uphold systems of oppressions from our own identities. I don't know if that answers the question right, but.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we had another question come through, just says, thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing your work and your insights. I really appreciate how you emphasize context and impact for design. They go on to say, I wonder in what ways students who are taking your course like this can take their learning outside of the classroom for broader social impact. In their research, they've seen students just taking the project as just that, a project or a task that they have to carry out for a grade for the class, and it's really stopped there or even before the class is over.
So I've seen this work in different ways. You know, because the toolkit itself is the design research process, I hear a lot, especially from graduate students, like, oh, I really get the iterative function of the design research process now, because I'm constantly saying, okay, you've done this prototype, now you need to go back to define because you don't know enough yet. And okay, now you need to go back to the elements of racism because now you know more. So you didn't choose this specific element of racism. And so it's this very iterative process that they're learning. And so to me, some students only take that iteration away. And to me, that's a win, because then it's still requiring that they think ethically within their design research process. They may not specifically take out the conversations that we have on race and racism. And that's okay with me, because then at least I've hopefully taught them an ethical way of designing. And some students really get passionate and they take almost, you know, as many classes as they can find that are also on the same subject. And thankfully I have many colleagues who do talk about race and racism within their classes that we can refer to each other. So I think they do, but in their own ways. And I think that's absolutely fine, because we also have students who take it at different levels. So it's mostly juniors who take my class. But then I also have some seniors in there, and I can see just that 1 year of difference makes a huge difference in terms of their output and the way that they're talking about it and how they're going to implement this. And when they're in industry, one conversation that we have in every class is, well, how, like that one Nivea ad, like how did it get out into the public domain? Like it had a photographer, it had a photo editor, it had a copywriter, an art director, you know, who was in charge of all of those people. But yet there was a system that still allowed this very racist ad to get out into the public domain. And so they start to think about that. Oh my goodness, like where am I going to be in that system? And it becomes a broader systems question. And then of course it turns to capitalism. And so sometimes it's just the value of those conversations and students leaning into those hard conversations and learning from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's obviously so important. And, you know, so what are, you've done some really like I won't say diverse, but like some really different projects. Do you have anything kind of in the pipeline that's coming next that would be interesting to maybe get a sneak peek on?
I think one of the things that I really love as a web designer, it is the agency it gives me within the skills that I have. And so one of the things that I'm looking into now is how to work directly with victims of human trafficking, or survivors, I like to actually refer to them as, because I want to teach survivors of human trafficking coding. And that's something I'm really interested in. So I'm working right now with two different nonprofits who actively educate victims of human and survivors of human trafficking. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to do that with them and making sure they have the right technology and that they're supported, because I think it would be wonderful to do that. And then honestly, we're focusing on a book for Racism Untaught. And so that's what I'll be doing this summer, is writing.
Absolutely. How great is that? So we did have one other question come in concerning the Racism Untaught. They go on to say, I'm wondering if the BI POC have the opportunity to contribute ideas to enrich the design research curriculum, such as in human trafficking.
So I'm wondering if the BIPOC community, so just because maybe not everyone knows what BIPOC is, it's Black, Indigenous, and Person of Color, have the opportunity to contribute ideas. I want to make sure I understand the question. So I have not included as much in my curriculum with human trafficking as I have with race and racism. I have in conversations, when I talk about my work with human trafficking, I really talk about it in terms of process and collaborations, because I'm working with people who are not designers. I'm working with victims advocates, social workers, well, designers by trade. I actually believe that everyone designs things around you. And so designers by trade, I would say. But I do enjoy working with people from different disciplines, because it's something I can talk about with graduate students, and how to create collaborations. And again, those long-term interdisciplinary collaborations have the opportunity to create things that you yourself, or me, myself, by myself, would not have thought of on my own. And so I think if I'm answering the question correctly, that it's really more about the process when I talk about my human trafficking work.
Absolutely, and this is more just an interest than anything else. I'm just wondering about your experience working with all of these truck drivers. If going in, I'm sure you had some thoughts about what those conversations and interactions may be like. Were they very different than what you were expecting, or did you have a pretty clear vision of how receptive they would be to things like this, and so on and so forth?
I don't know that I had an idea, but I definitely learned a lot from them. What I learned is that truck drivers love to talk. You get on a phone call with a truck driver, you're going to be on there for at least an hour and a half to 2 hours, because they're in the rig just driving. And if you want to talk, they'll talk. And so sometimes I would be on the phone for like I remember one conversation I had for 2 hours, and I really need to go. Really need to go now. But honestly, at the end of that 2-hour conversation, one of the quotes that's in this presentation, he's like, oh yeah, by the way, the other day I was driving down the highway and I saw this cage in the back of a truck. And this was like me trying to hang up for the 4th time. And then I heard that story. And so I was always welcome to talk to them. It seemed to me like truck drivers really wanted to be a part of the solution, because they knew it was an issue. I heard about many truck stops that they didn't even want to get out and walk around, because they knew they'd stepping on all sorts of stuff. And so, so I think from my perspective, it really seemed to me that they want to be a part of the solution.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And well, Lisa, I know we're coming up on time here. We've got many comments thanking you for your work in the chat here, and just saying how important and inspiring it is. We'll be on the lookout for your book in the future when that comes to fruition, and maybe it would be great to certainly have you back and to talk more about that. I want to just be sure to keep us to the hour here and want to just have a few final thoughts on my end about some future programs. But thank you so much again, Lisa, for your time and taking an evening with us here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And again, thank you all for joining us this evening. Like I mentioned, I did just want to bring forward the next opportunity to engage with our speaker series. We do have an event coming up in June, June 10th, and it'll be Professor and Dr. Julie Turnock, an Associate Professor of Media and Cinema Studies in the College of Media, and she will be presenting on recent digital effects and the aesthetics of 1970s cinematography. So I would just encourage you to keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending out some marketing in the days ahead about that presentation. And again, would encourage you to visit alumnilink.illinois.edu if you haven't done so already. We would certainly love for you to register and become a part of that platform. But again, thank you so much. We do have commencement coming up, so we will have some wonderful recent graduates. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out for more information there as well. But thank you all again. We look forward to seeing you at a program with the Alumni Association again very soon. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.